Hi there, welcome back to How to Recover and Heal from Spiritual Abuse. This is the fourth video in a 5-part series. My name is Remy Dieterich, the author of the book Broken Trust. I want to start off by reminding you why I'm doing this series. You know, I've seen too many people lost in their pain from being spiritually abused. Many of them have left the church, and some have even walked away from God altogether. And I hate to see this when I know that God is the one who can help them. I hate to see people walk away from the source of their healing and recovery. I wrote my book, Broken Trust, to help people recover from spiritual abuse, but I'm doing this video series right now to hopefully help even more people who might not pick up a book. These 5 videos are meant to give you practical steps that you can take to move forward in your healing and get on with your life. If you've been hurt by spiritual abuse, don't lose hope. You can not only recover from your abuse, but you can be a better person for it. God can take the pain in your life and use it to make something beautiful. He really can. You see, God is the God of resurrection. He takes things that were once dead and brings them back to life. So no matter what's been done to you, God can restore you and use your pain to help others. Now, in this session, I want to look at the importance of setting healthy boundaries. You see, people are abused spiritually because either they had no boundaries, they let down their boundaries, trusting that their spiritual leader or community was trustworthy, or their boundaries were ruthlessly broken down by intimidation, manipulation, and gaslighting from a twisted leader. So, what does it look like for someone to break your boundaries? Well, it can be overt, like physical and sexual abuse or shaming people in front of the community. But it can also be very subtle, where emotional boundaries are crossed as you're consistently made to feel inferior and indebted to the church or church leadership. They make you feel as if you aren't good enough to make it on your own. You're too sinful. You lack the spiritual discipline and insight of others. You require the safety of the community if you have any hope of knowing God or going to heaven. You see, the leaders seize on your self-doubt and use it against you. They'll even tell you that God told them something about you and what you should do. That's their trump card, right? Because how can you defend yourself against that? I mean, who can argue with God? But if you try to confront the leaders about their behavior, they'll deny it and dodge it and deflect your concerns, or possibly find a way to turn it all back on what's wrong with you. And that's what we call gaslighting. It's the behavior that makes you feel like you're going crazy. If you ever wonder if your boundaries are being crossed, trust your gut, because you'll feel it. Abuse is a violation of your will. And when someone violates your will, your emotions will respond with sadness or anger or both. God gave you those emotions as a warning sign. But your abusers have most likely trained you not to listen to your emotions, that your emotions are wrong, so you might not actually feel anything anymore. They've trained you to ignore your God-given warning signs, so you'll simply comply with no questions asked. I bet some of you know what I'm talking about. This might all sound too familiar. This is why it's important that you become aware of the boundary-breaking tactics of spiritual abusers, so you can protect yourself from more abuse. You know, it's unfortunate, but there's something about spirituality that causes us to drop our guard. We wrongly assume that everyone who professes a love for God is trustworthy, and it's okay to make ourselves vulnerable to them. But the problem with this misplaced trust is that we forget that people are human, and that means they're fallible, and some even evil. So dropping your guard can cause us great harm. And with this in mind, it's important to approach your spiritual journey with caution, knowing that you have to guard your heart from people who may not have your best interest in mind. Now, I want to give you my definition for a boundary. A boundary is a relationship is simply when you communicate to another person who you are and who you're not, what you will allow in your personal space and what you won't allow. Boundaries also communicate to people in your world who they are, Boundaries clearly define the role you expect people to play in your life. For example, a simple one. When you invite people over for supper, you might include the qualifier, or what I call a boundary, that you need to get up for work early the next day, and so you'll want to end the evening at 9 o'clock. That's a boundary. And without that boundary, some people might stay late into the night. In an abusive situation, boundaries are absent, or if they are present, they'll strategically and systematically be broken down by the abuser. Sometimes this is referred to as grooming, the subtle manipulation that's used to get people to drop their guard. Other times the abuse is an outright attack where people are bludgeoned with judgment and threats, even sexual abuse, often using God and the Bible to intimidate people into compliance and justify their behavior. If you've experienced spiritual abuse, consider how many chapters of your story have been written by people who had no right to have say in your story. They broke into your life, took the pen from your hand, and wrote your story for you. And now you are left with the consequences. You have to deal with what they wrote in your life. If you want to find peace in your life, it's important to take back those pens from everyone who shouldn't have one. Taking back the pens is another way of talking about setting boundaries. Boundaries determine who has the right to contribute to your story. Thankfully, God can turn your story around. If you're coming out of a spiritually abusive setting, it's important to reestablish your sense of self and guard it by instituting appropriate boundaries. There are 4 areas where you'll want to have boundaries when it comes to spiritual abuse. First, you'll want to have boundaries to keep your abusive group out of your life. Hopefully you've left the group by now, but they'll keep after you with reasons why you need to return. Second, you'll want to have boundaries for yourself. And what I mean by this is that there's a part of you that'll want to let down your guard and allow people to mistreat you and control you because you don't think enough of yourself. They have succeeded in making you feel inadequate, and so you're convinced that you need your abuser. There'll be this inner conversation, a battle within that wages inside of you, and you need to be able to say no to that part of you. Third, boundaries are necessary to have in regard to all the people who will tell you what to do once you've left your abusive setting. They'll all have the answer and want you to do what they are doing. They're probably well-intentioned, but it's important not to let them control you any more than your other abusers. And finally, if and when you decide to return to your church, you'll want to have strong boundaries to make sure that you don't become a victim of abuse again. Now, it's very hard for some people to implement boundaries because they crave the affirmation of others and don't want to hurt people's feelings. They fear that setting boundaries will cause people to reject them. And rejection is a greater threat to them than having their life taken over by someone else. I'll talk more about this idea of shame in my next video. People might also have a skewed idea of Christian compassion. They feel that the Christian thing to do is always obey, to always comply with what's being asked of them, especially by a spiritual leader. But that's not true. Jesus set boundaries. He knew who he was, and he marched to the beat of his Father, not the beat of the religious leaders of his day. You know, there's so much to say about boundaries, too much for these short videos. So you might want to go to my website, which is readingremy.com, where I've written a lot about boundaries. And while you're there, you can also learn about my books and coaching opportunities. My book, Broken Trust, is specifically written to help you recover from spiritual abuse. So I hope you'll check it out, and you can find it on Amazon.com. In my final video, I'm going to talk about 3 things that play into spiritual abuse: shame, anger, and loss. And these are 3 big topics, again, too big for a short video, but I want to touch on them briefly to point you in the right direction in regard to healing from spiritual abuse. If you found this video helpful, would you do me a favor and share it with someone else, especially online? Please subscribe to the video as well, so you can be alerted to the next time I put out a video. Hey, thanks so much for being a part of this today. Bye-bye.